Serious, Redditors who have had a near-death experience, what happened? I overdosed when I was about 16. It just felt like sleep. The one thing I'd recommend, don't do that cause paramedics will cause you as much pain as they can to keep you awake. I was shot with a bow and arrow. The arrow hit me in the chest and luckily missed my vital organs. It was a complete accident and I made a full recovery. But even though I forgave him, my friend who fired the shot and I no longer speak. Mom had a seizure while driving and I was in the passenger seat. Couldn't reach the brakes so tried to take the wheel and do the best I could. Drove into a guardrail just before a pretty steep cliff and went under it. But it stopped us before we went over. Holy, the exact same thing happened to me when I was a kid. Mum was driving me to school. And right before you reach our school there's a sharp 20% decline. Followed by a 20% incline. Like a U in the road. We flew down the hill and I remember thinking, holy it. Why is mum driving so fast today? Looked across and her eyes were slammed wide open and she had her face pressed almost up against the windshield in concentration. I knew she had epilepsy so I recognized it was a seizure. Just about hid my pants and grabbed the wheel. She slowed down to an absolute crawl and people behind us were honking. I just kept calling her name and eventually steered us onto the curb where she put the handbrake on and got out the car. It was weird. Like she was fighting the seizure like hell because she knew her kids were in the car. I didn't even know you could do that. I was using a urinal in a restaurant. And the next moment I was on a backboard surrounded by first responders. I had fainted in the restroom. And smashed my head on the tile floor. Causing a brain bleed. 1/3 of the people who do this die on impact. Sonny Bono. Another 1/3 die within 24 hours. Natasha Richardson. I was in the fortunate 1/3 that survive. But still have some lifelong issues from it. As a teenager I was skateboarding down the stairs near a road. I had been doing a few different tricks. But on my last try I did my signature nightmare flip. Which I've landed 100 times. Somehow this time I ducked up and fell on my ass. My board went into the street and got annihilated by a box truck instantly. Had I landed it, I would have been killed. It wasn't the kind of thing where I saw my life flash before my eyes or anything. But I just sat there in shock as the guy stopped and started screaming at me. My friends started yelling back. Blah blah blah. Everything was like muted and I just stared into the street like what the duck just happened? A friend and I were jumped by 4 grown men and accused of selling drugs. Totally untrue. Unfortunately this was on the top floor of a 5-story building. My friend was punched but escaped. I was cornered. 4 grown men kicked me all over the body and head before eventually telling me to get on my feet as I was to be thrown over the balcony. No way was I getting up, but literally just as I was dragged to my feet the police showed up. I was told to follow the 4 men down the stairs and away, but then they changed their mind and told me to go in front of them. As soon as I was in front I ran as fast as I could to the police who had gone into the shop on the ground floor presumably to find whoever had called them, most likely alerted by my screams. It ducked me up for a long time and even now 22 years later I am still uncomfortable in situations with groups of people who I don't know and who are drinking. Copy paste from something I've posted before. It was August. In I think 2010, could be 2009. Was during an under 18 sailing week. I was 17 or 16. Seriously, my memory sucks. Was during the 3rd race that week. Sailing along solo in my boat. I was kind of in the middle of the pack. But I'd gone a different tack to everyone else and so was quite far away from them all. Out in the middle of the estuary. Then I capsized. Usually this is no big deal. Happens relatively frequently. Only problem was this time the boom swung around and hit me on the head on the way down, throwing me into the water and leaving me stuck in the ropes. I was underwater, feeling groggy from the blow to my head, but remembered the training and calmly tried to untangle myself, which I managed. At this point I tried to surface, as I was now free and running out of air. The way the boat had gone down had ended up with me underneath the sail, which itself was now covered with ridiculously heavy water. I started panicking and trying to force the sail up with me under it. Unable to breathe, I realized I'd never get up, so I tried to calm down again and started struggling to swim along under it. Swimming underwater, wearing a life jacket sucks by the way. I realized a current was pushing the boat along with me and trapping me under the sail. So I did the only thing I could think of. I tried to force myself further underwater, swimming down and pushing my feet on the sail. You see, the current is actually weaker further down than it is on the surface. So my hope was to let the boat drift over me as drifted in the weaker current. I held there for a few more seconds, still not having breathed in I don't know how long, before clawing my way back up. If I didn't hit air, I knew I'd die. Thank God the current higher up had pushed the boat over my head, leaving me relatively close by. I grabbed onto the boat, now fully upside down, and kinda pulled myself onto it. After a few minutes spluttering up water and gasping, I righted the boat and just lay inside, sails and ropes flapping everywhere, just glad to be alive. TLDR, drowning is duckine terrifying. Hope you enjoyed. Edit. Some people responding to me have had far more traumatic experiences than I had. Luckily I never inhaled any water, but this experience still left me shaken, and it took me a while to go back to the water. The worst part was me thinking that my experience wasn't enough to justify the way I felt. I felt guilty about feeling so scared and hurt, like somehow I should have just taken it in stride and carried on. I wrestled with those feelings for months. It took a while for me to accept what I already knew intellectually. It was okay for me to feel that way, and I had no need to justify those feelings. Edit 2. I'm overwhelmed by everyone's responses. I sympathize with you all, and I'm so happy people are getting to share these experiences. Driving home from school for Thanksgiving break just over a week ago, I was caught in a flash flood going 80 down the highway. I was in the right lane of a 4-lane, 2 each way, road. A gust of wind hit me and I flew off the left side into a ditch and spun around like a carnival ride. If the ditch wasn't quite as deep I would have ended up in oncoming traffic. Closest to dying I've ever come. Been struggling with OCD that went undiagnosed for a year now. Stabbed myself 15 times or so the doctors said, and waited to bleed out in the bathroom tub. Luckily I said duck that, and woke my dad up to call an ambulance. I came out 100% alright, though, but the feeling of almost passing out from bloodless is something. Edit. Thanks everyone. I've never felt so cared about than I do now. I'm glad to have met everyone that replied to this, and the people who understand what I'm going through. Forgot what age I was. Young dumb kid age maybe 7 or 8. Friends and I were swimming in our pool and I decided it was a good idea to go to the deep end and swim from the bottom upwards behind the ladder, in the space between the ladder and the side of the pool. I knowingly did this and got stuck once I got the top half of my body past the first steps. So there I am basically stuck and drowning 4 feet underwater. My other friend who had goggles on saw me and somehow pulled the bottom half of the ladder far enough away from the wall for me to swim out from under it. The angle I was at I had no leverage on it myself since my arms were stuck to my side. So yeah, that was terrifying. Now anytime someone jokingly jumps on me or if I have the slightest feeling of being held down underwater I completely go into sheer panic. If my friend didn't see me, or they just left me underneath I would have 100% drowned. Me and some friends used to go to the beach to play volleyball some evenings. One night, me and one of the guys walked over to a gas station across the road in between games to get a snack or whatever. A minute or two later everyone pulled up in a car. When we went to go back, the chick driving, who no one really knew that well, was like, hey, just hop on the trunk and hold on. It's just right back across the road. So me and my friend are like, okay cool, and hop on. Well, this girl had the brilliant idea once we were in the parking lot to take a turn going about 40 miles per hour thinking it would be funny. Me and my friend both get flung off the back of the car. Luckily, he landed in grass but still ended up breaking his arm. Me on the other hand, I was thrown onto the pavement where I cracked my head open, broke a collarbone, ankle, and 3 ribs. I went unconscious, and from what I was told, one of my friends literally sat there holding the back of my head together while they waited medics to arrive. I had to get life-flighted to a hospital about an hour away. I had 2 or 3 seizures on the way. When I came around in the hospital later that evening the doctor told me had my friend not been holding my head together, or had the medics shown up like 5 minutes after they did, I probably wouldn't have made it. But all is well now. Actually, the dumbest girl left after she saw how bad what she had done was, and actually ended up getting arrested and charged with something or another. The last I heard she was in jail, but that was like 2-3 years ago. I was hanging out in a train yard at like 1 AM with my boyfriend in high school. We climbed on top of a train that had 2 storage containers stacked, so it was probably about 30 feet off the ground, to watch the stars. We really didn't expect the train to start moving because we had watched some other trains take off and we could see the lights and stuff come on well beforehand. Well, this one started moving with no warning at all, so we had to scramble down as fast as we could. It was heading downhillish, so we had to move real fast or we weren't going to make it. My boyfriend did fine coming down to the little platform between the cars because he's tall as hell, but I'm more than a foot shorter than him, so I missed the footing and slipped down the last 5 feet or so. He had already jumped off because the space was small and he had to get out of my way before I reached it. I hit the platform and stumbled back and my foot went over the edge into the gap between the cars. I was so ducking close to slipping into the gap and being crushed under the train that was now moving pretty fast. I still had footing with my other foot, so I pushed as hard as I could and kinda launched myself to the side where I tumbled down the gravel hill. I had some cuts and bruises, but other than that I was completely fine. I started laughing uncontrollably and basically thought, what a cool thing that just happened. I could have died, but then I had nightmares about being crushed by a train for like a month. Stupidest thing I've ever done, and I'm never gonna mess with trains again. TLDR. Tracks are for trains, not kids. Edit, because I think my tone is a little too lighthearted in my comment. There were 827 train deaths in the US in 2014. I could very well have been one of them. Don't duck with trains, ever. My reaction of laughing it off was probably due to the adrenaline at the time, and I in no way intend to repeat the situation. Please stay away from trains. So when I was 10, I had just gotten back from a Cub Scout camping trip in the middle of Buck Nowhere, Ohio. No phone service. Over an hour away from the nearest place with phone service. It was the day after and I was out with my dad picking up firewood when my stomach just started hurting like hell. As if I was taking the biggest hit of my 12-year-old life. I had to lay down in the back of the truck. My mom felt bad for me. My dad thought I was faking. He was in a pissy mood for the rest of the day. Anyways, I got home about 3 hours later, still feeling terrible, worse even. I then proceed to sit on the toilet for another hour, in agonizing pain, trying to push out what I thought was the biggest turd ever created in the history of mankind, to no avail. My mom comes in and asks if she can put 2 fingers up against my lower waist and push for a second. She does so, and I feel the worst pain I've ever felt in my entire life. Her brother had appendicitis when he was 16, and that was the thing that sent him over the edge like it just did to me. I get rushed to Children's Hospital and I lay in my mom's lap for 3 hours in horrible pain waiting to get in to see a doctor. When I finally do get in, they do an ultrasound on my lower chest and waist, and I hear the nurse gasp. My mom says, "Oh no," and the nurse tells her that the appendix is supposed to as big around as your pinky finger. Mine was about 1.5 inches in diameter and I was rushed into surgery. I was in so much pain that normally 12-year-old me was absolutely terrified of needles. I kicked a nurse in the chest multiple times last time I had to have a shot, that I just let them stick the IV in without fighting. I was so exhausted from waiting and the pain that I passed out before they put the mask on. Before my mom called my dad. My dad still thought I was faking, until he got the call from my mom where he thought she was prankish him until she yelled at him to get down to the hospital. I wake up the next morning and look over to my dad, and the first words I say to him were, "I told you so." It's hilarious looking back on it, but also terrifying because normally symptoms last 24 hours. Mine lasted 10. I later learned I was 2 hours away from the appendix bursting. It was even scarier thinking that I was just at a Cub Scout camp miles and miles away from help, and I would have died there more than likely. TLDR, just got back from Cub Scout camp in the middle of nowhere. Dad thought I was faking pain to get out of work and got pissed. Turns out it was appendicitis. Almost died. When I woke up, first thing I said was, "I told you so." About 2 years ago I had a cold. I didn't think much about it except something along the lines of "duck it. It sucks but it will go away." 10 days later it was still there and had gotten worse, but it still wasn't going to keep me down. I went out with a couple of friends. Met a guy and ended up sleeping with him. It was okay. Nothing spectacular, but I was kind of out of breath. I just ignored it. It was nothing and went away. The next day I met up the same guy for lunch and ended up at his place again. Same thing happened. I was completely out of breath again, but this was much worse. Guy noticed and thought it was his spectacular performance. I knew it wasn't that good. After I left, I thought maybe I should stop at one of those walk-in clinics at Walgreens or CVS. I tried to make an appointment, but there were no openings. I was about to just go home when I drove by an urgent care place and decided to stop. At this point I was still out of breath but naive as to what could be going on. I checked in and they took me right away despite having a pretty busy waiting room. Took my vitals and my BP was 80/50 and my O2 was in the low 80s. The nurse was amazed I was still standing. She ran and got a doctor who came running in immediately. She verified my vitals and said I had to get to the emergency room immediately and ambulance was on the way to take me there. I said I could drive and I was told I would probably pass out shortly, so they wouldn't allow me to drive. I started to get a little concerned after that. Things get a little hazy after that, but I remember arriving at the ER and being greeted by several doctors. I remember getting X-rays, MRIs and CTs. My mom and friend had also showed up. Someone had called them since they were my emergency contact. The last thing I remember is the doctor explaining to them that I had severe pneumonia. Both my lungs had collapsed and I was septic. I was in and out of it for several days. I was in the ICU and in isolation for a couple. It took a while to recover and I still have some lasting damage, but for the most part made a full recovery. On the positive side, since I was in the hospital for so long, I was able to quit smoking and I have never gone back. I was told after I got out of the hospital that had I gone home that first night instead of getting medical help, I probably would have not made it. As for the guy who thought his performance caused me to become short of breath, when he next reached out to me for a hookup I was still in the hospital. I explained what was going on and he freaked out about being exposed to some horrible disease and he couldn't afford to get sick at the moment. It went on and on like that. I never spoke to him again. Sorry for the long story. TL. DR. 6. Difficulty breathing and pneumonia don't always mix. Alone and had food poisoning that caused a gastrointestinal infection. Roommate found me dehydrated and delirious. I took in 6 fluid bags at the hospital. Have a lung problem. Was born with it. Had both my lungs collapse during an asthma attack. Was clinically dead for about 3 minutes. Felt like I got hammered and blacked out. Only the hangover lasted about 2 weeks. I did go-kart with a scarf on, and it caught on the wheel. It was attached in a sort of sliding knot that meant instant hanged man. It eventually ripped itself from my throat, and when I found the scarf later, it was intact. I still don't know how I survived that. It should not have been possible. It really should not have been possible. I should be dead. I was on a drop tower ride, and as it dropped my safety bar came loose. The belt stopped it from going all the way up. But even that was long and I'm a pretty small dude. I nearly slid out the side as it shot back up. The warning light came on slow and the operator didn't notice. Heart was pounding because I could feel myself slip more as the speed would pick up. I nearly fell out completely if I wasn't being held on to. It happened 2 years ago when I tried hanging myself. As I was choking, my body started frantically writhing like a worm on a hook. The rope couldn't hold me any longer and I fell down. I laid for a few minutes on the cold, filthy ground, and it was quite the experience. I felt disconnected, like cracked glass that was about to shatter and spread in all directions, and yet, it didn't. While stuck in the observer consciousness, you start feeling everything, every muscle in your body, your weakened limbs, the cold air on your skin. You start acknowledging what living truly is, and what it means to living beings like us. It was a very transformative experience. About 9 months ago I was in a car accident. I was on my way to my girlfriend's house. 45 minutes drive. I have never seen so much rain before. And here I am. A stupid 19-year guy driving his 1997 Mitsubishi Charisma. I hit a puddle of water which made my car aquaplaning on the left side. The car was turning left as I turns right. I oversteered the car and hit the crash barriers with about 120 km/h. In that short period of time, I relived my whole life. seeing memories I've had with my family, friends and my girlfriend. I also remember thinking that this is how it is going to end. 30 had passed, and a stranger opened the car door, asking if I'm okay. I didn't feel any pain, so I stood out and looked at my car. None of the airbags had been activated, and the front was completely crushed. I could go from the accident with a bit of pain in the elbows and back, after hitting the crash barriers with 120 km/h. I am thankful of being alive today. My car after the crash. Copy and paste from a previous post of mine. I posted this for a similar question in the past. In the 5th grade, I was at a close friend's pool party. We all decided to play chicken in the pool. Of course, I've always been the tall guy in the group, so I'm usually on the bottom. Well, we lost a round and I fell flat on my stomach on the bottom of the pool. All fine and dandy until I realized that somehow a few of the kids' legs were knotted and bound with my partner's arm dart that was wrapped around my neck. The worst part was that everyone in the pool kept pushing my friend down, the birthday boy, to dunk him and mess around. So my friend couldn't tell them I was under him and no one knew I was at the bottom. I attempted to push them all up to get out of the water about 5 times, being pushed and slipping back to my stomach on each attempt. The final time I had no more energy and felt calm laying at the bottom of the pool. My surroundings faded and I passed out. I woke up at some point in the lawn throwing up water dart, terrifying for me to this day. TLDR. Almost drowned, and basically felt my life force draining as I blacked out. 0/10 wouldn't do it again. Accidentally drowned at age 5, was pulseless for 2 minutes and was in a vehicle that counterflow. Head-on collision, was not wearing seatbelt and was ejected out of the vehicle. Told this before, so I am keeping it short. Nearly froze to death in a cabin in the mountains. Either hallucinated like nuts, or had a spirit lady save me. Whichever it was. Wood was cut. A fire was started. I woke up the next morning. Was riding downhill on a bike with a road at the bottom. Found out brake wasn't working and didn't do anything about it. Thankfully there was a fence at the particular segment where I was separating me from the road. So I crashed in that instead of riding full speed into the road with cars. My house has a car entrance, and that's where I would go with huge excitement to hug my dad when he came from work. Keep in mind I was about 5 or 6 years old. So my dad comes and I run to the car, but he can't see me. I was very short, so he can't push the brakes. I swear the only thing that saved me as I went under the car was a big vase that stopped the wheels. I remember my dad crying and I don't want to imagine what would happen if not for that vase. I was working live sound at a festival for a small town. While we were setting up the speaker and light structure, we noticed the wire cable that hoists and holds the speakers was starting to fray, so we were going to bring the speakers down to replace the cable. As we are bringing the speakers down, I heard the cable start to creak. Then, like in a movie, time slowed down. I heard the cable snap. Some lady screamed, and about 500 pounds of speakers fell from about 10 feet in the air and landed about 6 inches away from me. Luckily no one got hurt, but if I was positioned any more to the right I probably would have died or lost a limb. I had been playing hide and seek at night when I was 12 and my mom had already told me to go inside several times. On the last game before we wrapped up I ran for the base and did not see one of those Mexican cast iron tripods used for cooking outdoors and ran straight into it. Ours was rusty and full of dirt from being left in the rain, and one of those legs jammed straight my skin just above the ankle. It hurt like hell, but I knew the ass kicking I as in for because my mom had already told me to go inside several times. Mexican. So I limped it off, rolled up my sock and hid it from my parents. For about 2 weeks I wore nothing but sweatpants around the house and jeans to school. I thought the gash had closed since I could see a scab had formed and it had stopped hurting, even though it still looked red and swollen. Fast forward a few days later and I have a ridiculously high fever and end up in the emergency room. The cut had gone septic, the infection had eaten away at the flesh just below the scab. The doctor said there was a high chance of amputation if the infection had reached my bone, and I was lucky I didn't die. When I was 8 I was at a driving range hitting golf balls with my older brother who was 19 and quite good. It was just me and him there since my dad was playing in a small tournament on the course and we were waiting for him to get done. I hit a crappy shot that went like 15 feet in front of me to the right, and I decided it was far enough away from my brother so he wouldn't hit me, and like I said, he was a good player. The last thing I remember was bending down to pick up my ball. Apparently my brother had a rare bad swing and his ball hit me very hard in the side of my head. I was knocked out immediately. My body went into the fencing response as a result of the trauma, and my brother thought I was having a seizure. He assumed the worst, thinking it hit my temple, and he really thought he had killed me. He stayed as calm as he could and called 911 and also tried to get a hold of our dad. I woke up to my dad and brother next to me, and my brother started bawling his eyes out saying how sorry he was, and then I started crying too. I did have a concussion, and eating for the next 2 weeks hurt my jaw because of the bruise. I learned my lesson, and my older brother is currently an amateur on the PGA Tour, so I guess it had a happy ending. Cycling down a blissfully quiet country lane in the UK in the height of summer, enjoying myself. An 18-wheeler comes out of nowhere from behind. Didn't even hear it. It sailed past me and the rear left taillight pylon clipped me, hooked around my backpack and ripped me out of the saddle and sent me flying into a ditch. My view was straight ahead, then ground, then sky, then ground, then sky, then grass, then sky, then ditch, then black. I remember coming round a few minutes later, and I distinctly remember it being quiet and sunny still, as if nothing had happened. Driver didn't stop, didn't see him or get a license number or anything, and this was about 12 years ago, so I don't remember the fine details. When I was flying through the air, I had the weirdest thought about the lorry, that it was blue and that was a nice color for a lorry. Why would you think about that when your life is literally flying before your eyes? It's not a very interesting story, but over the summer I went down an incline while skateboarding with a helmet, lost control of my board, and hit the back of my head pretty hard. My whole body seized and my arms went up in a fencing position for a couple seconds, and I truly thought I was going to die. However, it ended and I got up, with blood everywhere. I immediately tell my friends to drive me to a hospital, and there was a huge gash on my head. I never thought life could be that fragile, and when my mom came to pick me up, I cried the whole way to my house. I almost died, and it was fucking terrifying. I guess I'm a little better now. However, I can't really describe the experience without tensing up and feeling sick to my stomach. I guess I have PTSD from it, and I'm very paranoid when it comes to my head. I don't skate anymore, and I'm not that much of a risk taker anymore either. Wear your helmets, guys. That paralyzing feeling you can get by hitting your head is horrific.